Hello again. Tonight I told you the story of a girl whose life changed in a used bookstore. A stormy encounter there turned into longing, shyness, and finally a love that had to overcome silence before it could be spoken aloud. If you'd like these stories to be even more heartfelt and uncensored, you can check out my Patreon page in the description section before we begin. The first time I saw her, rain was coming off the city sideways, hard enough to make the windows of Bellwether books shiver in their frames, and I was standing in the philosophy aisle pretending not to cry over a secondhand copy of The Waves. It had been that kind of week. My umbrella had died outside the tram stop, one metal rib snapping loose like a small betrayal. My tote bag was damp through. My hair had collapsed into dark ropes against my cheeks. Somewhere between my morning lecture on narrative theory and the humiliating email from my landlord about the rent increase, I had started to feel as if the entire city had quietly agreed to test how much loneliness a person could carry before it started showing in the face. Bellwether was the one place where that feeling usually softened. It lived on a narrow street behind the old theater, all warped floorboards and breathing radiators and shelves so tall they made you tilt your head back like prayer. It smelled of paper, rain, dust, and black tea. I had been coming there since my first month at Northwick, when I learned that grief became less noisy if I trapped myself among books and listened to the rustle of other people turning pages. That evening, the shop was nearly empty. A woman in a green scarf stood near the front, till with a stack of art journals under one arm. The owner's cat was asleep on a stool beside poetry. Somewhere overhead, a pipe knocked twice. I remember every detail because the moment I noticed her, the air around me seemed to tighten and sharpen at once, as if my own body understood something before my mind had the chance to. She was in the literature room at the back, where the older hardbacks were kept behind glass and the lamps threw small amber circles over the tables. She wasn't doing anything dramatic. She was only standing there with one hand in the pocket of a long black coat, looking down at a shelf of annotated classics as if she had all the time in the world and absolutely no interest in being observed. But she carried stillness the way some people carry perfume. It moved ahead of her, altered the atmosphere, made everything else feel suddenly louder and less composed. I should have looked away. I knew that, even then. There was something almost dangerous about how beautiful she was, not in a bright or inviting way, but in a way that made me instinctively straighten my spine. Her dark hair was damp at the ends and tucked neatly behind one ear. Her profile had the clean severity of a line drawing. She wore no jewelry except a watch with a narrow leather strap. There was rain on the shoulders of her coat, and the faintest trace of something warm and expensive in the air around her, cedar and iris and night. I had just decided I was being ridiculous when she reached for a book on the highest shelf, shifted another out of place, and 3 hardbacks slid free at once. One hit the floor with a slap. The other 2 landed against my shoes because, with timing that felt like fate playing some private joke on me, I had stepped into the aisle at exactly the wrong moment. "Oh, sorry," I said, bending too fast. "So am I," she said at the same time. Her voice stopped me more effectively than the sight of her had. It was low and precise and calm, with that kind of quiet authority that made you lean in without meaning to. By the time I crouched, she had already done the same, and suddenly we were both reaching for the same battered copy of Nightwood. Our hands touched over the cover. It was such a small thing, barely a graze, a polite accident. But my breath caught so sharply I felt embarrassed by it. She noticed. I know she noticed because her fingers paused under mine, just for a second, and when I looked up, her eyes were on my face with a level steadiness that made the rest of the room seem to retreat. They were an unusual gray, not pale, not icy, but deep and storm-colored, as if rainwater had learned how to look back. "You take it," I said, and hated how soft my voice came out. A corner of her mouth moved. "Ha, you got there first." "I'm not sure that's true." "I'm very sure," she said. There was amusement in it, but not carelessness. She spoke the way she stood, contained and exact, as though every word had already been weighed before she offered it. I drew my hand back. She lifted the book, glanced at the cover, and then at the copy of The Waves tucked under my arm. Virginia Woolf and Juna Barnes in the same storm, she murmured. You came prepared for devastation. Heat rose under my skin. Maybe I have a type. Tragic women? Beautiful sentences, I said, before I could stop myself. This time, the smile reached her eyes, and it was worse than if she had touched me again. It made her look less severe and far more impossible. Those are usually the same thing, she said. I laughed under my breath, partly because she was right, and partly because my body was misbehaving in ways I resented. I was not, as a rule, a person who lost my balance because a stranger looked at me for half a second too long. I was 22, annoyingly self-aware, usually competent at pretending not to feel things too intensely. But there was something about her that made pretense useless. She seemed to see me with unnerving completeness and not be startled by what she found. We stood up together. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved away. Rain thundered against the back skylight. The lamp above us flickered and steadied. She held out Nightwood. At least let me earn the right to borrow your literary taste. Tell me whether it's worth buying this edition. I took the book because refusing would have felt stranger than accepting. The cover was cloth-bound, and the corners worn silver with age. Inside the front page, someone had written a date in blue ink from 40 years ago. It depends, I said, flipping through. Do you like your books untouched, or do you like evidence that other people survived them first? Evidence, she said instantly. I looked up. That was quick. Untouched books are suspicious. Either they haven't been loved properly or they haven't earned it. Something in my chest tightened. It was such a small remark, but it landed with the intimate accuracy of a confession. I turned to the margins. There were notes in a precise slanting hand, underlinings that grew more impatient toward the end, one furious question mark beside a passage about wanting what destroys you. I smiled despite myself. You'll like it, I said. Whoever owned it before was either heartbroken or brilliantly dramatic. Those are also usually the same thing. I handed the book back. Our fingers brushed again. This time, neither of us moved immediately. Outside, a bus splashed through standing water. The shop door banged, wind drove in a scatter of cold air, and somewhere near the till, the owner called that they would be closing early if the weather got worse. The woman glanced toward the front. That sounds like my cue to decide whether I'm buying catastrophe. Most people come here for comfort. Most people are cowards. The line was so dry I stared, then laughed aloud. She watched me with a look I couldn't read fully, something intent and private and unexpectedly warm. What about you? She asked. Comfort or catastrophe? I should have said comfort. I had spent the last year trying to become a person who chose safer things. Safer cities, safer silences, safer versions of herself. Since my mother died, I had grown oddly disciplined about disappointment, as if lowering my expectations might keep the world from taking anything else. But under that gaze, in the little circle of amber light, with rain hemming us in on all sides, the truthful answer rose up before I could hide it. Catastrophe, I said. Her expression changed by a degree so subtle I might have imagined it. I thought so. The owner announced the shop would close in 10 minutes. I blinked, suddenly aware of how long I had been standing there talking to a stranger, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. I cleared my throat. You should get the book. You sound invested. I have a weakness for books with a history. Do you? Yes. She looked at me for one long second. I suspect you do. I don't know why that sentence felt like a hand at the base of my neck. Maybe because she said it as though she meant more than books. Maybe because I wanted her to. We walked toward the till together, though not deliberately. We just happened to drift the same way, both carrying our chosen damage. At the counter, she bought Nightwood, and, after a brief hesitation, an old essay collection on confession in modern fiction. I paid for Wolf with coins from the emergency pocket of my bag and tried not to think about how aware I was of her standing beside me, removing one damp glove finger by finger. When the owner handed us our paper bags, she looked toward the window and muttered something obscene about the weather. I made the mistake of following her gaze. The street outside had disappeared into silver sheets. Gutters overflowed. Wind bent the sycamore branches nearly double. I had 20 minutes on foot to my flat, and an umbrella that now belonged in a museum of failed objects. "You'll never make it with that," the woman said. I stared at my umbrella handle protruding from my bag. "I respect your honesty. I'm not trying to be unkind." "I know." She considered me for a moment, then opened her coat slightly and reached inside. My entire nervous system misfired before I realized she was only taking out a compact black umbrella, still dry, folded neatly. "I'm walking toward campus," she said. "If you are too, we can share." I ought to have said no. Any sensible woman with survival instincts would have thanked her and invented another route. The problem was that I had already said yes in a dozen private ways the moment she looked at me over the fallen books. "That's very dangerous of you," I said lightly. "Sharing an umbrella with a stranger." Something unreadable flickered in her gaze. "I have a feeling you're less dangerous than you look." That nearly made me forget how to breathe. "You have no idea how dangerous I look." A hint of laughter touched her voice. "No, but I'd like to." The room tilted. Not literally, of course, but something inside me did. Then she turned toward the door as if she had not just rearranged my pulse. I followed like someone under a spell, not because I was naive enough to think a shared umbrella meant anything grand, but because certain moments arrive with the devastating clarity of being meant to matter, and you feel foolish resisting them. The bell above the door rang when she pushed it open. Cold, rain-scented air rushed in. She stepped onto the pavement first, opened the umbrella in one clean motion, and waited for me to come under it. We were forced close at once. The umbrella was wide, but the rain was relentless, angling under the edges. Our sleeves brushed, her perfume deepened in the damp air. I became absurdly conscious of every inch of my body, of the heat from her shoulder, of the way my own hand shook a little where it clutched the paper bag. The city had gone soft and reflective under the storm. Lamplight pooled gold on the pavement. Cars hissed through flooded streets. We started walking, careful around the slick cobbles. And after a moment, she angled the umbrella more toward me. "You're sacrificing your own coat," I said. "I'll survive." "That sounds grim." "It's only practical." I glanced at her. Rain had loosened a strand of hair near her temple. "You always sound like that?" "Like what?" "Like you're secretly judging the entire world and finding it badly organized." She turned her head toward me. There was unmistakable amusement now. "Only when I'm in an especially benevolent mood." "Good. I'd hate to meet you when you're cruel." Something in her face softened, then closed again so quickly I almost missed it. "You wouldn't like me cruel." The answer was simple, but it carried a weight that made my throat tighten. She said it like memory. We walked another few paces before I asked more gently, "Long day?" "Long year." There it was again. At that quick glimpse of something under the polished surface. Not weakness, never that, but weariness, perhaps, or an old ache kept under immaculate control. "I'm sorry," I said. She looked surprised. "For what?" "For whatever made you say it like that." Rain battered the umbrella. A tram rattled past the crossing ahead. For a moment, I thought she might ignore the question, or smile it away. Instead, she said, very quietly, "You pay close attention." "I read faces," I said before thinking. "And what do you read in mine?" It felt suddenly dangerous to answer honestly. I tightened my grip on the paper bag and looked ahead at the shining street. "Someone who's careful," I said. "Someone who decides what other people are allowed to know." "And you dislike that?" "No." My voice came out almost embarrassingly true. I think it makes me curious. We had reached the gates that cut through to the university quarter. I was so lost in her that I didn't immediately realize where we were, only that the walk had become too short and the thought disappointed me in a small, panicked way. She slowed. Do you live on campus? Near enough. So do I, for now. That should have meant nothing. It should have been one more harmless detail between strangers. Instead, it landed inside me like a struck match. At the gate, we had to pause because wind nearly tore the umbrella sideways. She caught the handle with one steady hand and, without thinking, put the other lightly at my waist to keep me from stumbling on the wet stone. Her palm was warm even through my coat. My breath stuttered. She realized what she'd done at the same time I did. For one suspended second, her hand stayed there, fingers spread, not gripping, only holding me in place while rain roared around us and the streetlights blurred gold in the water. Then she let go. I'm sorry, she said, though the apology sounded strained. It's fine. It was not fine. It was about to ruin me. We crossed through the gate in silence after that, but it was not an empty silence. It felt crowded with everything neither of us had said. When we came to the fork, where the path split toward the student residences and the faculty houses beyond the library, she stopped. This is me, she said. I looked up. Beyond the dripping trees, one of the old stone buildings rose dark against the storm. Faculty houses, then. Something about that detail made her seem even more unreal, as if the city had made her out of rain and old books and set her down only for the evening. I should have thanked her and walked away. Instead, I asked the reckless question, do I get to know your name, or are you planning to remain a literary weather event? This time, her laugh was quiet but unguarded, and it altered her face so completely that for a second I forgot every other word I knew. Elin, she said. Just Elin. No surname, no explanation. Ayla, I offered. She repeated it once, as if testing the shape. Ayla. The way she said my name, carefully, almost thoughtfully, felt more intimate than it should have. We stood there under the umbrella while rain filled the world around us. Then she looked toward the path behind me and seemed to gather herself back into whatever disciplined place she usually lived. Go home before you freeze. Ayla. Are you ordering me? Advising you. You sound very certain I'll listen. Will you? I smiled because it was safer than saying the truth, which was that I already might have followed her anywhere. Probably not. Her gaze lowered briefly to my mouth before rising again. It happened so fast I might have imagined it, except the air between us changed. Good night, she said. And then she turned away, walked down the faculty path without once looking back, and left me standing in the rain with a ruined umbrella, a warm spot at my waist, and the distinct violent sense that something in my life had just begun. I slept badly and woke with her name in my mouth. Not in any dramatic way. I wasn't murmuring it into the pillow like a girl in a fever dream. It was simpler and somehow more embarrassing than that. I opened my eyes before dawn to the sound of rain still tapping at the window, and my first clear thought was Elin. I tried to behave like a rational person. I showered, dressed, made coffee thick enough to keep me upright, and told myself the previous evening had only felt enormous because my life had been narrow lately, and loneliness has a vulgar habit of turning chance into prophecy. I had known her for less than half an hour. She was older, elegant, devastating, and likely uninterested in anyone with damp sleeves and overdue library fines. There was no reason to build mythology around a stranger with a beautiful mouth. Then I found, tucked into the waves where I must have placed it without noticing, the receipt from Bellwether Books. On the back, in the same precise slanting hand I had seen inside Nightwood, someone had written, "Buy the difficult books. They tell the truth first. No name, no explanation. Just that line." I stared at it for so long, my coffee went cold. Noor found me like that in the student union an hour later, hunched over the receipt as if it were a coded military document. You look either newly in love or newly indicted, she said, dropping into the chair opposite mine with all the chaotic grace of someone who had never once entered a room at half volume. Noor Tan had been my first real friend at Northwick, and possibly the only person alive who could pull me out of a spiral by sheer force of personality. She was studying architecture, lived mostly on instant noodles and dangerous confidence, and possessed the kind of beauty that made people underestimate how observant she was. Her eyeliner was perfect, even at 9 in the morning. Her curls were piled up in a silk scarf the color of rust. She set down her sketch tube, stole half my croissant without asking, and narrowed her eyes. What happened? Nothing. She took another bite. That answer is an insult to our friendship. I slid the receipt across the table. She read the line, looked up slowly, and smiled with inappropriate delight. Oh, this is not nothing. It is. It was just. I was at Bellwether during the storm, and there was this woman. There's always this woman when you say it like that. I put my face in my hands. Please let me die with some dignity. Absolutely not. Start over and include the details you are very obviously skipping. So I told her. Not all of it. I kept certain parts to myself, like the hand at my waist and the dangerous way my own body had answered. But enough. The fallen books, the umbrella, the note. The fact that I had come home feeling as if I had stepped into a story built specifically to make me unmanageable. Noor listened with the bright avidity of a person who loved romance most when it wasn't happening to her. And did this mysterious storm goddess tell you anything useful? She asked when I finished. Only her first name. Elin, Noor repeated. That's very severe and lesbian. I approve. I laughed despite myself. That isn't a real category. It absolutely is. There are names that sound like they would ask if you'd eaten, and names that sound like they could ruin your GPA with a glance. Elin is the second kind. My pulse did something stupid at the words, ruin your GPA. She's probably 35. Older women are legal, Ayla. You're allowed to enjoy a winter aesthetic. I'm not enjoying anything. I'm being normal about a stranger I will probably never see again. Noor lifted the receipt. The woman wrote on the back of your bookshop receipt. She had good handwriting. You are beyond help. I snatched the receipt back before she could stain it with jam. I'm serious. It doesn't mean anything. Fine, she said cheerfully. Then I look forward to hearing absolutely nothing about her every day for the next month. The thing I hated most was that she would have been right even if the universe had behaved itself. But by 11:15, the universe had escalated from cruel to theatrical. My Tuesday seminar that term was called Intimacy, Ethics, and the Modern Novel, a new upper-level course that half the department wanted and the other half feared would be intolerably pretentious. I had enrolled partly because the reading list included every writer who had ever made me feel seen, and partly because grief had left me unable to tolerate shallow things. If I was going to spend my final year at Northwick learning how to survive myself, I preferred to do it through difficult books and women who refused to end neatly. The classroom was on the 3rd floor of Ashcombe Hall, one of the old buildings with narrow windows and radiators that hissed like irritated ghosts. By the time I arrived, the room was filling with damp coats and the smell of wet wool. Saskia Reed was already at the front, arranging her notebooks in aggressively straight lines. She gave me a brief nod. Saskia and I had done 2 seminars together the year before. She was brilliant, meticulous, and impossible to read in a completely different way from Elin. Where Noor burned hot, Saskia moved coolly through the world, polished as glass. She came from money, wrote essays that made tutors sigh with gratitude, and never once seemed hurried by anything. Our relationship was cordial in the way rival weather systems are cordial. We occupied the same landscape without merging. You're late, she said, though I wasn't. I'm early for the right hour and spiritually absent for several others. Charming. I dropped into a seat near the center and took out my pen. My mood had been fragile all morning, full of after-rain static. I was already tired. I had not expected anything from the seminar except distraction. At 11:20, the door opened. There are shocks that feel loud, and then there are shocks so complete they happen in absolute silence. She stepped into the room carrying a leather folder and a stack of books pressed neatly to her chest. The same black coat, now dry. The same dark hair, smooth and precise. The same impossible face, composed into professional stillness. For one blinding second, my mind refused to join the evidence in front of me. Bellwether. Rain, the umbrella, her hand at my waist, by the difficult books. Then she set the books on the lectern, looked up, and her gaze met mine. Recognition struck across her features, subtle but unmistakable. Not surprise, exactly. Something sharper, something like impact, quickly buried. The room kept moving around us, chairs scraped, someone coughed, a radiator banged once. My stomach dropped so violently I thought I might actually be sick. "Good morning," she said to the room, and the sound of her voice in that context, clear, formal, untouchable, was somehow worse than if she had denied knowing me. "I'm Dr. Elin Voss. I'll be teaching this seminar through the winter term." Noor's words from breakfast flashed through my head with the force of divine mockery. Could ruin your GPA with a glance. I think I stopped breathing for the first minute of class. She introduced the course structure, the reading sequence, the assessment split. I wrote nothing. My notes page remained blank, except for the name I found myself tracing once in the margin before I violently crossed it out. Dr. Elin Voss, visiting lecturer from London, according to the department email. Research specialization in desire, secrecy, and narrative ethics. Of course. Of course, the woman from the bookstore would teach a course on desire and ethics. Apparently, irony had become an administrative policy. She did not look at me again for several minutes. When she did, it was the careful, equal look a lecturer gives any student while asking the room a question about confession as performance. Nothing in her expression suggested umbrellas, notes, catastrophe, or the fact that I had spent half the night replaying the cadence of my own name in her mouth. I hated how disappointed that made me. Then, halfway through an analysis of interiority in a text we had not yet read closely, she said, "Some forms of restraint are not the opposite of feeling. Sometimes they are its most devastating proof." A simple remark, entirely appropriate to the seminar. No one in the room reacted beyond scribbling it down. I felt it hit me like a hand closing. Saskia raised a question about whether concealed desire was inherently romanticized in 20th century fiction. Dr. Voss answered with elegant exactness. Another student argued badly about moral transgression. She dismantled him in 3 sentences, so polite they might have passed for kindness if you weren't listening properly. The room began to orbit her quickly. She had that kind of authority, the sort that didn't need volume because it was built on absolute control. And under it all, I sat with my pulse in my throat and the sick, thrilling certainty that life had decided subtlety was overrated. When the class ended, everyone surged toward the door in clumps of conversation. I moved more slowly. Not because I intended to speak to her, but because my body was refusing instructions. I was still packing my bag when I realized the room had emptied around me. Not completely. Saskia remained at the lectern discussing bibliography options. Dr. Voss answered her with her usual poised focus, yet there was a tension in the line of her shoulders I had not seen while she was teaching. I looked away at once, ashamed of noticing. Saskia finally left with a neat thank you. The door clicked shut behind her. I should have gone then. Instead, I stood there with my bag half-zipped, staring at my own hands. Ayla. Hearing my name from her in that room nearly undid me. I looked up. She had moved around the lectern. Up close, the difference between Bellwether Elin and Dr. Voss was almost unbearable. Same eyes, same mouth, same faint scent of cedar and iris. But now she wore tailored charcoal instead of rain-darkened wool, and every line of her posture insisted on distance. The note in my receipt might as well have been a fever hallucination. "I didn't know," I said, because the sentence had forced itself out of me before I could choose something safer. Last night. I didn't know you were. No, she said, and for the first time there was a fracture in her composure. Nor did I. That should have comforted me. Instead, it made everything feel more real. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The radiator hissed. Outside the window, rain threaded down the glass in thin, slow lines. Then she folded one hand over the other, a small gesture of self-discipline. I assume you understand the importance of keeping our prior acquaintance exactly as limited as it was. Acquaintance. The word stung more than it should have. Yes, I said. This course has strict boundaries. Her voice was gentle but formal. For both our sakes, I would prefer that our interaction remain entirely professional. Something in my chest pinched hard. It was ridiculous to feel rejected when there had been nothing to reject, but feeling and logic had stopped being close friends the night before. Of course, I said, aiming for dignity and landing somewhere thin. I wasn't planning to throw myself dramatically across your office hours. A flicker of something crossed her face. Regret, maybe. Or the desire to smile and the refusal to allow it. I'm not questioning your judgment. It sounds a little like you are. Her gaze held mine. I'm questioning mine. That silenced me. I don't think she intended to say it aloud. The words seemed to surprise her too. For one dangerous second, the room lost its professional shape and became the back room of Bellwether again. All amber light and rain and impossible tension. Then she stepped back. You should go, she said quietly. I swallowed. Right. I hoisted my bag, walked to the door on unsteady legs, and managed to keep my face neutral until I reached the corridor. Only then did I lean against the cold stone wall and close my eyes. Noor found me 10 minutes later in the stairwell between Ashcombe and the library, gripping the banister as if I had narrowly escaped a fire. You look like you've seen God and hated the experience, she said. I opened my eyes. The woman from Bellwether is my new lecturer. Noor's jaw dropped. No. Yes. No. Yes. She made a noise that began as sympathy and ended as delighted horror. Oh, that is criminally unfair. I laughed once because if I didn't, I might have done something more embarrassing. Tell me about it. Did she recognize you? She asked me to keep our prior acquaintance limited. Noor stared. Our prior acquaintance? She talks like a beautifully repressed legal document. She also said she was questioning her own judgment. That shut Noor up for a full 2 seconds, which remains one of the rarest events of my academic life. Then she grabbed my arm. Ayla Mercer, she whispered with reverent scandal. You are in trouble. She was right. I knew it before the first week ended, because it wasn't only that Elin was beautiful. Beauty is survivable when it remains ornamental. It becomes dangerous when it starts speaking directly to the hidden architecture of your loneliness. Her classes did that. They were impossible not to feel from the inside. She taught as if texts were living things with teeth, as if every sentence worth reading had first cost someone blood. She asked questions that cracked people open without ever sounding cruel. She treated us like thinkers, not children. And when she moved through the room while we argued over what desire owes to morality, she seemed to sharpen the air merely by existing in it. I tried everything reasonable. I sat farther back. I avoided office hours. I stopped going to Bellwether on Tuesdays. None of it mattered. Because the problem was not proximity anymore. The problem was attention. Once I realized how her mind moved, I was lost. She noticed things no one else noticed. She knew when a character lied to herself 3 chapters before the lie became visible. She could hear fear in an argument dressed up as theory. She once looked at a single sentence in my seminar response and wrote in the margin, "You are skimming the edge of something true here. Be braver." I stared at that comment for a full minute before closing the notebook and pressing it to my chest like an injury. No one had ever accused me of bravery with such precision. And because fate was apparently committed to destroying me elegantly, the weather kept turning. Rain on Monday. Rain on Thursday. Rain so fine it hovered in the air like breath. It rained so hard it drummed on lecture hall windows and made the campus smell of wet leaves, stone, and old earth. Every storm brought Bellwether back to me in painful detail. Every storm made me remember the umbrella, the warm pressure of her hand at my waist, the quiet in her voice when she said I paid close attention. By the second week of term, Nor had given up pretending I was manageable. "You're doing the haunted stare again," she informed me one evening as we sat on the floor of my flat surrounded by books, takeaway cartons, and the kind of domestic disarray that only occurs between people who have stopped trying to impress each other. I'm reading. "You've been on the same page for 11 minutes. I looked down. She was right. The sentence in front of me had dissolved into pure atmosphere. Yanor tossed me a packet of salt and vinegar crisps. "Tell me something useful. Is she cruel?" "No." "Flirtatious?" "No." "Married?" "I don't know." "Human." I hesitated. Nor groaned. "That bad?" "She's—" I struggled because language kept failing me exactly where it mattered. "Self-contained. Like she's holding herself very still all the time." "Because of you?" "Don't." "I'm serious." I pushed a hand through my hair. "Not because of me. Maybe partly because of me. I don't know. There's something else there." "Scandal?" "Why does your mind always go there?" "Because university departments are just monasteries with more sexual tension." Huh. I laughed despite myself, then fell quiet. Nor watched me for a moment, her expression softening. "Hey," she said. "Yeah, you know you don't have to make this tragic just because it feels intense. That isn't really up to me." "It partly is." I picked at the crisp packet. "I'm not planning to do anything." "No, but you are planning to suffer beautifully, which is annoyingly on brand." "I hate that you know me." She smiled and reached over to knock her shoulder lightly against mine. "That's what I'm here for." I loved Noor for many reasons, one of them being that she never mistook my seriousness for fragility. She knew grief had made me quieter, but not smaller. She also knew that before Northwick, before my mother's illness and the move, and the ex-girlfriend who had left me with a careful speech about emotional timing, I used to trust my feelings more openly. The last 2 years had sanded that out of me. I had become good at wanting privately. Elin made privacy feel impossible, even when she was doing nothing at all. The first time she called on me in class after Bellwether, the room seemed to narrow. "Ayla," she said, glancing down at the marked-up text in front of her. "You disagree with the narrator's self-defense. Why?" It was a fair question. My hand had been half-raised already, yet hearing my name in her voice while 30 other people looked from me to her nearly sent every coherent thought fleeing. "Still," I answered. Because if there was one thing worse than wanting her, it was wanting her to think I was timid. "She confuses explanation with absolution," I said, surprised that my own voice sounded steady. "She tells the truth about why she wanted what she wanted, but she keeps talking as if honesty automatically makes the wanting noble." A slow quiet fell over the room. Elin's gaze rested on me. "And does it?" "No," I said, "but it makes judgment more complicated." The tiniest pause. "Good," she said. Nothing else, just that one word. But it landed inside me with absurd force. After class, Saskia caught up with me on the stairs. "You realize she likes your brain," she said. The bluntness of it made me nearly miss a step. "Excuse me?" "She keeps pushing you." "That is generally what lecturers do." "Not like that." I forced a laugh. "You sound jealous." "I sound observant." Her tone held no real hostility, only cool interest, and somehow that unnerved me more. "Well," I said, adjusting the strap of my bag. "Thank you for the professionally alarming feedback." Saskia's mouth tilted. Try not to self-destruct. You're one of the only people in there worth arguing with. Then she walked away, leaving me with the unpleasant awareness that whatever was happening between Elin and me might not be as invisible as I desperately wanted it to be. The first time I went to her office, it was because I had no choice. That is what I told myself anyway. The truth was more embarrassing. I had a choice, several in fact, but I rejected all of them because they involved either silence or distance, and by then both had become harder than risk. The essay prompt she assigned in week 3 asked us to write on secrecy as a form of intimacy rather than its opposite. It was the kind of question that felt designed specifically to find the weak points in my body. I had drafted and redrafted my opening paragraph 6 times, but each attempt collapsing into either abstraction or accidental confession. By Friday afternoon, I was still staring at a blinking cursor in the library and hating every sentence I touched. Noor, who had long ago accepted that I no longer required practical advice so much as emotional threat, glanced over my shoulder and said, "You're going to office hours, or I'm sending that woman a respectful email accusing her of psychological warfare." She would probably agree with you. Then hurry up before I improve the accusation. At 4:15, I found myself outside Elin's office in the faculty corridor, carrying my notebook and enough dread to flood the building. The corridor was quieter than the rest of campus, lined with framed portraits of dead academics, who all looked mildly disappointed in the living. Rain ticked at the tall windows overlooking the quad. Halfway down, on a door with frosted glass, someone had taped a simple card. Dr. E. Voss, visiting lecturer, office hours, Fridays 4 to 6. I stood there for a full 10 seconds, my pulse stupidly loud. Then I knocked. "Come in." Her office was smaller than I expected, and somehow more intimate for it. Books lined 2 walls in double rows, spines marked with paper slips. A kettle sat on the filing cabinet beside a ceramic cup painted with tiny blue irises. There was a brass reading lamp on the desk, and a dark green wool coat hanging with military precision on the back of the door. Everything smelled faintly of paper, tea, and the same warm cedar fragrance I had begun to associate with personal ruin. She was seated behind the desk, glasses low on her nose, reviewing a stack of seminar responses. The sight of her in glasses nearly ended me on the spot. "Ayla," she said, and removed them at once as if realizing the intimacy of the image a second too late. "Come in." I closed the door behind me and crossed the room with what I hoped looked like the stride of a competent adult, rather than a woman walking voluntarily into the center of her own problem. "I have a question about the essay," I said. I assumed that was why people came to office hours. Her voice was dry, but there was no unkindness in it. "Sit down." I sat. She gestured to my notebook. "Show me where it's tangling." I had prepared for distance, formality, perhaps even a kind of cool impatience designed to remind me of the line between us. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, elbow on the desk, and read my pages with total attention. Not indulgent attention, not flirtatious attention. Worse, serious attention. The kind that made me feel visible at the level of thought. "You're circling your argument," she said after a minute. "I noticed. You're protecting yourself from saying what you actually believe." I gave a startled laugh. "Is that your official feedback style? Public humiliation in a private office?" "It would only be humiliation if I were wrong." I opened my mouth and shut it again. Her gaze lifted to mine. "You think secrecy can be intimate because it creates a second language between people. Something shared precisely because it cannot be displayed. The reason you keep dodging the claim is that you also think it can be corrupting. And you don't yet trust your own ability to hold both truths at once. There are moments when being understood feels indecent. That was one of them." I stared at her. "Have you been reading my diary?" "If I had, your syntax would be better." "Despite everything," I laughed, and the room shifted around the sound. Something in her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You're very cruel for someone with a teacup like that." I said. Her eyes flicked to the blue irises. You dislike the cup? No, I think it's dangerously humanizing. Then perhaps I should replace it with something more severe. Too late. A silence followed, brief and strange, not empty, never empty with her. My hand rested on the notebook between us. Hers was on the desk, only inches away. I became painfully aware of the shape of her fingers, the neatness of her nails, the faint blue vein at her wrist. I dragged my gaze back to the page. So what do I do? Be less afraid of complexity. That sounds expensive. Most truth is. She reached for my notebook then, turned it toward herself, and crossed out my opening paragraph with one firm line. Her handwriting was as elegant in motion as it was on receipts. Beneath the dead paragraph, she wrote, "Intimacy is not made innocent by being hidden. It is made powerful." My throat tightened. That's your first sentence, she said. It sounds like yours. It sounds like what you mean. I looked at the page, then at her. How do you always know? A change crossed her face so quickly I almost missed it. She leaned back a little, as though the answer required distance. I don't, she said. I only know when someone is pretending not to know. The air in the office changed. I could feel it physically, like warmth gathering under my skin. I wondered if she knew how dangerous she was when she spoke like that. I wondered if she always knew. She folded her hands. Anything else? A dismissal, gentle but unmistakable. I should have taken it. Instead, I heard myself say, "Why did you write on my receipt?" The question hung there between us. Rain tapped at the window. Somewhere down the corridor, a door shut. Ellen's eyes held mine for a long second. That was careless. It was kind. No, she said softly. It was indulgent. The word should have cooled me. It did not. I liked it, I admitted. A faint tension moved through her jaw. Ayla. My name sounds different when you say it in here. She inhaled once, controlled and measured, and stood up abruptly. The movement startled me. She crossed to the window, looked out over the wet quad below, and for a moment all I could see was the line of her shoulders beneath the black knit of her sweater, held so still it seemed costly. This cannot become something neither of us can manage, she said without turning around. I sat very quiet. I know. Do you? Yes. At that she did turn, and whatever she saw in my face seemed to unsettle her more than if I had lied. She came back to the desk, but did not sit. Then let me be clear. I am responsible for this room. For you, here, for every student in that seminar. Whatever happened in Bellwether was an accident, a misrecognition. The phrase hurt. I tried not to show it. Is that what you call it? It's what I have to call it. I looked down at my notebook, at the sentence in her hand that would now sit at the top of my essay like a private wound. You keep talking as if language can save you. Her breath caught, very slightly. Sometimes it can. And if it can't? For a moment, she said nothing. Then so quietly, I nearly didn't hear it. Then restraint has to. I left a minute later with my notebook, a new opening sentence, and the distinct, unbearable awareness that the distance she was trying to keep between us was costing her too. That knowledge was not a comfort. It was accelerant. I wrote the essay that night in one sitting. It came out of me feverishly, as if her office had unlocked something and then left it raw. I argued that secrecy can operate as both refuge and distortion, that hidden languages make intimacy incandescent precisely because they are denied witness, but also vulnerable to fantasy. I wrote about the ethics of withholding, the violence of exposure, the strange tenderness of what remains unnamed. I did not write about Bellwether, the receipt in my desk drawer, or the way my heart had lifted and broken at once when Elin said indulgent in that careful, bruised tone. When she returned the essays the following Tuesday, My paper carried a high distinction and 3 comments that might as well have been fingerprints. Excellent. You finally trusted your intelligence. Sharper here. And at the end, where my final paragraph almost confessed more than scholarship required. Beautifully argued. Dangerous. I stared at that word until the room blurred. Nor snatched the paper from me over lunch and read the last line aloud with indecent delight. Beautifully argued. Dangerous. I'm sorry, are the two of you having an affair in footnotes? Give that back. She held it out of reach. Ayla, this is erotically hostile. It is academic feedback. It is yearning with punctuation. I lunged for the paper. She cackled and finally returned it when I threatened to pour soup into her lap. Across the dining hall, Saskia sat with 2 students from our seminar, talking with composed intensity. At one point, she looked over and caught me watching. Her gaze dropped to the essay in my hands and then back to my face. There was no accusation in it, but there was awareness. And again, I felt that small, cold edge of exposure. That evening, it rained so hard the library windows turned black. Northwick's main library stayed open until midnight during term, and after 10, it developed a peculiar intimacy. The undergraduates who were there to be seen had gone home. What remained were the serious, the desperate, and the beautifully doomed. Pools of light floated above long tables. Wet coats steamed near the radiators. Pages turned with a hushed, devotional sound. I was in the literature stacks looking for a criticism text Elin had recommended when I saw her. She was at the far end of the aisle, one hand resting on the ladder rail, reading the spine of a book under the dim brass light. She wasn't wearing her coat, only a dark blouse with the sleeves rolled to the forearm. The sight of that bare strip of skin should not have affected me as much as it did. I nearly backed out before she noticed me. Then she lifted her head. For one suspended second, neither of us moved. Ayla, she said, quieter than in class. Dr. Voss. The title sounded absurd in the dimness, but I clung to it. She glanced at the books in my arms. Still choosing catastrophe, I see. The line was so unmistakably bellwether that my pulse jumped. You started it. A faint, unwilling smile. Did I? Yes. She seemed about to say something else, then looked past me toward the end of the aisle where 2 students were whispering over photocopies. The smile disappeared. Did you need something? She asked, composed again. I could have lied. Instead, I held up the criticism text. This was impossible to find. I thought you'd hidden all copies for ideological reasons. Only the badly argued ones? I laughed softly. That feels tyrannical. It's curation. The 2 students at the end of the aisle gathered their things and left. Silence settled in behind them, denser than before. Rain rattled the high windows. Somewhere in the next room, a trolley wheel squeaked and faded away. Elin descended one rung of the ladder. Your essay was very good, she said. Warmth flooded me, fast and embarrassing. Thank you. You stopped apologizing for your own thought. That sounds like a strange compliment. It's not. Most people spend years disguising their intelligence in ways they think will make them more forgivable. I looked at her. You say things that make it hard to remain emotionally detached. The words were out before I could stop them. She went very still. Ayla, she said, not warning, not quite plea, just my name again in that voice that made every nerve turn toward her. I set my books on the nearest shelf because my hands had become unreliable. I know I shouldn't say things like that, but you make everything feel... I searched for a word that would not humiliate me. Specific. A shadow moved through her expression, gone almost instantly. And you think that's because of me? Isn't it? She stepped off the ladder fully now. We were not close, not touching, but the aisle was narrow and the books on either side created a kind of enclosure that felt intimate in a way neither of us had chosen. Or maybe both of us had. It would be easy to let you think that, she said. My throat tightened. But But intensity is not always a promise. Sometimes it's simply recognition. Sometimes you meet someone at exactly the wrong time and the wrong place, and everything in you answers anyway. The words landed deep. Is that what this is? She did not answer immediately. Her eyes moved over my face with devastating care, as if memorizing and resisting were suddenly the same task. I don't know what this is, she said at last. That is part of the problem. I exhaled shakily. You keep saying problem like you're trying to convince yourself. A pulse beat once in her throat. Then, impossibly, she laughed under her breath, weary and low. Do you enjoy making my life difficult? No, I said truthfully. Only yours in relation to me. That dragged a real smile from her, brief but luminous. It hit me with the force of weather. Then footsteps sounded somewhere behind us, and the moment closed like a shutter. She stepped back at once. Go home before the tram stop. You do realize you tell me what to do a lot. Yes, she said, already gathering herself. And you do realize you never listen. I picked up my books. Maybe I like being instructed by impossible women. Ayla. Again that note. Half reproach, half something far more dangerous. I smiled because it was safer than doing anything else. Good night, Dr. Voss. She watched me for 1 second too long before looking away. Good night. Outside the library, the rain had slowed to a fine, cold mist. I crossed the quad with my coat unbuttoned and my heart thudding like I had outrun something. I hadn't, of course. If anything, I had moved further in. 2 days later, Ellen stopped me after class. Not dramatically, simply, Ayla. A moment, please. In the same tone she used to ask students about deadlines. The room emptied around us in wet coat rustling waves. I stayed where I was, pulse loud and resentful. When the last student left, she came down from the lectern and stood near the front row, not too close. You left early on Thursday, she said. I almost laughed at the understatement. Did you call me back to discuss my attendance at gallery events? A small frown touched her brow. No. Then what? Something moved in her expression. A private calculation. Marianne is an old colleague. There it was. Explanation offered before I had asked. My heart kicked painfully. I didn't ask, I said. I know. Then why are you telling me? Her gaze dropped for a brief second, then lifted again. Because I didn't like the look on your face when you left. My mouth went dry. You noticed. I noticed far too much where you are concerned. The honesty of it hit so hard I had to sit down in the nearest chair before my knees embarrassed me. She remained standing, which somehow made the room feel even more precarious. Rain touched the high windows. Somewhere outside, students shouted across the quad. She was not my partner, Elin said carefully. The air left my lungs. I looked up. Not? A faint, almost smile, sadder than amusement. No. Were you correcting my assumptions or your own? My own would be easier to live with. There it was again, that brief, ruthless opening beneath the control. I swallowed. So who is she? Elin's face changed, drawing inward. Someone who knew me before I learned how expensive being visible could become. I heard the ache beneath the sentence, even though she had tried to flatten it. What happened? She looked at me for a long moment, as if deciding whether truth itself was a kind of trespass. Then she said, a rumor. Years ago. Not entirely false. Not entirely true. I was younger, less careful. It cost me more than it should have. Every part of me stilled. With a student? I asked, the words coming out softer than air. Her eyes sharpened. No. The force in that answer made my cheeks heat with shame. I'm sorry. So am I. Her voice gentled. But you should understand why I am exacting about boundaries. I did understand. More than she knew, because suddenly, Bellwether, the office, the library, the way she kept pulling herself back from some invisible edge, all of it rearranged around that hidden old wound. It wasn't only professionalism, I said quietly. It was fear. A long silence. Yes, she said. The simplicity of it undid me more than any self-defense would have. I looked at my hands. I don't want to be another thing that hurts you. Something in her expression broke open. Just a fraction. You already aren't. A week later, the first kiss happened because the sky broke open over campus at 6:30, and neither of us could keep pretending weather had nothing to do with fate. I had stayed after seminar under the respectable pretext of asking about the winter research placement. The pretext was not false. I did want the placement. I also wanted, with a longing that had grown sharp enough to feel holy, 5 unguarded minutes in a room with her. The others had gone. Rain hammered the windows so loudly it blurred the edges of speech. Elin stood at the front desk reviewing the placement materials with me, one hand resting on the papers between us. We were discussing archival methods, or trying to. My concentration had abandoned me somewhere around the moment she leaned close enough for me to catch the warmth of her skin beneath cedar and iris. "You're more than qualified," she said, tapping a paragraph in the application guidelines. "But don't perform confidence. Write from the place where your thinking is strongest." "That place is currently being compromised," I said, before I could stop myself. Her hand stilled on the page. "Ayla." "I know." "Do you?" Not a question, barely a breath. The room had gone quiet except for rain. Not actual quiet. The storm was violent. But the kind of quiet that happens when two people step so fully into awareness of each other that everything else becomes background weather. I looked at the papers because I couldn't look at her and stay reasonable. "You keep asking me that as if the answer might save us." She did not reply, so I made the mistake of raising my eyes. She was watching me with a restraint so visibly painful that something inside me gave way. There was no mistaking it anymore. No academic language left to hide inside. No safe interpretation. She wanted me. And she hated that she wanted me. And I was so far past salvage that all I felt in that moment was relief. "Elin," I said, and it was the first time I had used her name to her face since Bellwether. Her breath caught. The sound of it seemed to tear the last careful layer from the air. She moved before I fully understood that she was moving. One step around the desk, then another, until we were standing close enough to feel each other's warmth while the rain battered the windows and dusk thickened against the glass. "This is a mistake," she said, but her voice had gone low and rough, altered almost beyond recognition. "It might be," I whispered. Her eyes searched my face. "You don't know what this could cost." "I know what not touching you is already costing." The truth of it shook through me. I hadn't planned to say anything so naked. But with her, that was becoming impossible. She made me honest by merely standing still. For one suspended second, I thought she would step back. Instead, she lifted a hand and touched a wet strand of hair near my temple. Barely there, the back of 2 fingers against my skin. That tiny, almost cautious caress struck through me with the force of a confession. "You should not say things like that to me," she murmured. "Then stop asking questions that deserve honest answers." A startled, helpless little laugh escaped her, and it was the most intimate sound I had ever heard. Then she closed her eyes for a heartbeat, as if steadiness required darkness. When she opened them, she looked wrecked and beautiful and done resisting. The first kiss was not sudden. That was the unbearable part. We both felt it arriving. She let me see the decision happen and the fear with it. Her hand came to the side of my face. Mine found the sleeve of her jacket, then the warmth of her wrist. Our breaths mingled once, shakily, and then her mouth touched mine. It was soft for less than a second. Then everything I had been holding back for weeks broke open at once. I had imagined kissing her so many times that I thought reality would feel smaller. It didn't. It felt exact. Her mouth was warm and careful, and then not careful at all. and the quiet sound she made when I leaned into her was enough to undo my bones. She kissed like she lived, controlled until suddenly she wasn't, every restrained thing turning fierce the moment it was finally allowed to exist. My hand found her waist. Hers slid to the back of my neck. Rain roared beyond the windows, the whole world a blur of water and dark, while inside that empty seminar room, I learned what it felt like for longing to become real. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Elin kept her forehead against mine. This, she said unsteadily, is why restraint exists. I laughed, half wrecked, half incandescent. That sounded like an argument against your own position. It was. Her thumb brushed once beneath my ear, devastatingly tender. God, Ayla. I had never heard my name sound like that. Then the reality of the room returned all at once. The desk, the door, the fact that fluorescent corridor light showed faintly beneath it. Ellen straightened immediately, though the effort cost her. She stepped back, hand falling from my neck, and I felt the loss of it like sudden cold. We cannot do this again while I am still teaching you, she said. Pain flashed through me so quickly I had to force myself not to show it. Right. Her face changed at once. No, not because I regret it. Then why does it feel like I should? She took a breath. Because if I am careless with you, I could harm you, your work, your reputation. This is not a novel, Ayla. Universities are full of small, vicious people with a talent for righteous speculation. I thought of the old rumor, of Saskia's observant eyes. The heat in me gave way to colder understanding. So what happens now? I asked. Aylin looked at me with so much naked feeling it almost hurt to bear. Now we survive 6 more weeks. We did, though not cleanly. The kisses after class became the shape of our waiting. Brief, stolen, devastating. In the stairwell behind Ashcombe, while the building emptied floor by floor. In her office with both of us still wearing our coats, as if preparedness might save us. Under the stone arch beside the library when rain drove everyone else indoors, and she held my waist with both hands before kissing me like restraint had finally become impossible to defend. None of it felt casual. Every time her mouth found mine, every time she whispered my name against my skin as though it were both apology and prayer, I had the wild, unreasonable certainty that some loves arrive already carrying the weight of destiny. She was tender in ways I had not expected from someone so composed. She noticed when I was cold. She tucked my scarf properly beneath my collar. We lived on fragments and almosts, and the promise of the term ending, and I might have survived that if the world had been kinder. It wasn't. Saskia warned me first. She found me outside the print room with her jaw set and said, "Someone is talking." 2 postgrads. She had overheard, wondering why Dr. Voss seemed unusually invested in one particular student. Nothing explicit, nothing anyone could prove, just enough poison to make me cold all over. I went to the final seminar feeling transparent. Aylin must have known something was wrong the moment I walked in. Her gaze caught mine once, sharp and searching, and then slid away before anyone else could follow it. After class, she did not ask me to stay. That frightened me more than if she had. I was halfway across the quad when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Library Annex. 5 minutes. The annex was nearly empty, just locked journals, dust-heavy windows, and the wet gray light of late afternoon. Aylin was waiting between the microfilm cabinets, coat unbuttoned, jaw tight. Saskia heard gossip, I said before she could speak. I know. Her voice came clipped. Halden asked me this morning whether I was over-investing in certain students. Rage flared so fast I went hot with it. That is obscene. Yes. Did he say my name? No, but he meant it. Rain traced the windows. Somewhere in the building, a trolley rolled over uneven flooring and faded away. This is my fault, I said, because the thought had already rooted itself. Elyn's head came up at once. No. If people noticed, they noticed because people are starved for drama and allergic to complexity. She stepped closer. Do not take responsibility for other people's malice. I laughed bitterly. That sounds exactly like something a woman full of responsibility would say. For 1 second, she almost smiled. Then the exhaustion came back. I may have to recuse myself from marking your final paper, and from the placement recommendation. The floor seemed to tilt. Not because of the recommendation, though that mattered, but because I heard in her voice what the practical announcement concealed. Fear, anger, the old wound reopening. A rumor is enough to do that? Sometimes the rumor matters less than the institution's appetite for precaution. I hated every word of that. Most of all, I hated the look on Elyn's face, as if she had expected this from the beginning and had still hoped she might be wrong. Without thinking, I reached for her hand. She let me take it. In that moment, it felt more necessary than caution. Her fingers tightened once around mine, hard enough to hurt. I don't regret you, she said. The simple ferocity of it cracked something open in me. Then don't let them take this from us before it's even had a chance to exist. Pain, tenderness, and decision moved through her face all at once. Ayla, if I choose badly now, they can make you carry it for years. And if you choose fear? The question landed. I watched her absorb it like a blow. Then she stepped back until there was rain and empty air where her warmth had been. For now, she said, and her voice sounded as if it hurt to produce. I choose the version that leaves you untouched by this place. I hated her for that sentence for almost 48 hours. She recused herself from my final paper the next morning. Professor Halden announced, with bureaucratic blandness, that an external marker would handle a handful of seminar assessments for administrative efficiency. Elyn did not answer the message I sent that night. She did not answer the second one either, the one that simply said, "Please don't turn me into something you survived by denying." I cried only once, which felt ungenerous given the scale of the damage, but it happened at Bellwether beneath the literature shelves where I had first seen her, and it was bad enough that the owner silently pressed a tissue box into my hand and pretended not to notice. Nor let me rage without trying to tidy it. She thinks she's protecting you, she said from my kitchen floor, eating dry cereal from the box because she refused to respect bowls on principle. She's protecting a version of the story where she gets to be noble. That's probably true, Noor said, and also probably unfair. I know. Ooh, you still get to be furious. I was. Furious enough that when the email about the winter research placement arrived 3 days later and told me I'd been selected, my first feeling was not joy, but heartbreak, because she had wanted this for me and I could not tell her. Then Marianne Holt found me in Bellwether on the final Friday of term. I'm not here to make your life stranger, she said. That would be ambitious. To my surprise, she smiled. Up close, she looked more tired than polished. Elyn told me once that when she's frightened, she becomes unbearably correct. I thought she was flattering herself. I stared at her. Marianne's gaze moved over the shop and settled on me again. The old rumor wasn't about a student. It was about me. I was married and cowardly, and I let an institution decide she was the cleaner sacrifice. Something in my anger shifted, not gone, only widened. She didn't tell me that. She wouldn't. Marianne glanced toward the rain-streaked window. She also refused an extension at Northwick this morning. Halden wanted her for another term. She said no. The floor seemed to move under me. Why? Marianne's expression was very gentle. You know why. I did. That evening, Northwick held its winter reading in the old Humanities Hall, where selected students read from essays or creative work before the term finally broke apart. I had planned not to go. Then Noor appeared at my flat in red lipstick and moral outrage, held up my coat, and said, "Absolutely not. You are going to read your beautiful, dangerous paper and force the universe to watch." So I went. When they called my name, I walked to the lectern with my pulse hammering and read the final pages of my paper on secrecy, intimacy, and the ethics of being seen. Halfway through, I looked up. Elin was standing at the back of the room, not seated with the faculty, not hidden. Simply there, coat still on, rein dark at the shoulders, eyes fixed on me with a steadiness that made the rest of the hall disappear. Something in my voice nearly broke. I kept reading anyway. When it ended, the applause felt far away. I stepped down from the stage on shaking legs, accepted Noor's crushing embrace, and then turned because I could feel her moving through the room toward me. People were still talking. Chairs were scraping. Yet somehow a clear line opened between Elin and me as if the world, for once, had the decency to get out of the way. She stopped in front of me, close enough to touch, close enough that I could see the strain in her face, the sleeplessness, and the decision. "I was wrong," she said. No preamble, no disguise. I stared at her. "About what?" "About thinking I could protect you by making you feel abandoned." The hall blurred around the edges. "Ellen, no." Her voice shook once and steadied. "Let me say it properly. I have filed my final marks. I am no longer responsible for your work. I am leaving Northwick at the end of the week unless you tell me not to hope for anything. And I am done allowing fear to sound like virtue." My eyes burned all at once. Elin took one step nearer. "I met you in a bookstore and knew almost immediately that I was in danger of wanting you in ways I could not afford. Then you kept being brilliant and brave and impossible to forget. Hurrah! I have tried distance. I have tried discipline. I have tried the particular kind of cowardice that calls itself care. None of it changed the truth." Her gaze searched my face, unguarded now, almost fierce in its vulnerability. "I love you, Ayla." The room vanished. I don't remember deciding to cry. I only know that suddenly tears were on my face, and I was laughing through them because after everything, after all that restraint and rain and almosts, the words had arrived with the clean force of destiny. "I hated you for 2 days," I whispered. A broken little smile touched her mouth. "That seems low." "I know." I took a shaking breath. "I was going to hate you longer, but then I found out you resigned in a fit of melodramatic integrity and ruined my schedule." Something like relief, bright and stunned, moved over her face. "That sounds serious." "It is." I stepped closer until there was no respectable distance left between us. "You don't get to love me like a tragedy, not unless you plan to stay for the happy ending." For the first time since Bellwether, she laughed without reserve. It made her look younger, almost astonished by joy. Then her hand came up, hesitant only for a breath, and touched my cheek. "May I kiss you?" she asked softly, now that I have finally earned the right to ask in the correct order. My whole body answered before my mouth did. Yes. Her kiss was gentler than the first one, and somehow more devastating. No panic in it, no borrowed time, just the warmth of her mouth, the sure slide of her hand to the back of my neck, the soft collective hush that passed through the room and then dissolved beneath applause, laughter, and Noor's scandalized cheering. I kissed her back with every lonely, hopeful, furious part of myself. Brand, when we finally parted, her forehead rested against mine, exactly as it had in the seminar room. Only now there was no door to fear, and no gradebook between us. Outside, the rain had softened to silver mist. We walked out of the hall together into the wet winter night while the campus lights trembled gold on the pavements. At the gate leading toward Bellwether, I stopped. "Where are you going at the end of the week?" I asked. She looked at me as if the answer had been waiting for this question. "Wherever you are willing to let me begin again." So we began there, under the old stone arch with rain in the trees and the city breathing around us, my hand in hers with no one to recuse, no role left to hide inside, only the difficult, bright truth we had finally chosen. Later we would make practical plans, argue over cities. learn each other in daylight, tell and retell the story of the bookstore until it became ours in 100 versions. But that night, she kissed me once more beside the wet iron gate, slow and certain, and I understood that some loves do not arrive to ruin you. They arrive to ask whether you are brave enough to be changed, and if you are, they feel exactly like destiny.